Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions. Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks. This is a quick update to thank you for building our number of patrons to 76 and growing on patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Soon, when we reach 100 active patrons, we're going to start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle each and every month to one active subscriber, so you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're glad to have this returning guest. It's been a while since he's been with us, but this is Craig Hemke. He's the founder of the TF Metals Report. Craig, thank you for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Don, again, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Nice to see you.
We appreciated meeting you in person at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium in Las Vegas, Nevada. In fact, my wife and I had a chance to be back there just recently. I wanted to ask you about an article you recently wrote, which was about the 3 themes of 2018. We're well into 2018, but it's not too late for our viewers to hear about what your major themes are and how they're shaping up for this year, what you see ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of a big picture post that we put up back in the first week of January. And it was, I thought, pretty valid set of points at the time. And now the way things are playing out, I want to keep people focused on that big picture. And so that's why I've been bringing it up quite a bit recently. In 2017, actually go back one more year, done again. In 2016, you recall, the narrative was that if Trump got elected, oh gosh, all hell was going to break loose, right? Stock market was going to crash, all this jazz. And Trump got elected, and that's immediately what happened on election night. And
First night, yeah.
Yeah, then magically, the whole thing reversed. And I woke up the next morning, as did you and everybody else, and we're like, wow, wait a second, everything's rallying, everything. And this narrative that heretofore had not been even discussed was suddenly everywhere. And that was how the dollar was going to soar, and the bond market bubble was going to burst, and the stock market was going to go. I mean, all these different things. We called it the generally accepted narrative of 2017. It was just came from nowhere. All of a sudden, oh, this is what it's going to be. And we took issue with that at the time and thought the bond market bubble's not going to burst. This idea that long, 10-year notes going to go to 5% or something is just nonsense. And so that kind of held us through 2017, and it ended up being a pretty good year for precious metals investors. Well, to carry that over, I said, okay, here are our themes for 2018. And I just was looking at this a moment ago before we started talking, and I even said, now give this a little while to play out because we're talking big picture stuff here. So it's mainly about the U.S. dollar and its viability going forward and risks to it as a reserve currency. And this is significant and very important, especially to viewers of your channel who are, I guess, dare I say, reluctantly prepping for what may very well be coming, right?
You bet.
Just be cautious and be aware of these risks. And so many people aren't aware of the risks because all anybody knows really that's left alive is a world where the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And that gives the U.S. tremendous power, both economically and militarily, frankly. It also gives all of us American citizens a real privilege of being able to have all of these social welfare programs and defense spending and $1 trillion deficits without having to pay the piper of massive inflation and what that does to regular people and their ability to save money. And so anyway, these themes of 2018 all had to do with the dollar and ultimately its role as reserve currency. That's not going to change this year, at least I don't think, and it may not change next. But this idea that that's going to go on forever and that King Dollar will always reign supreme is not necessarily the case. So the three themes real quick, done again, were political risk and how political risk could impact the dollar. Well, gosh, in the last week or so, we've certainly seen how that's kind of starting to flare up. And as you know, the midterm elections are coming up in November, and if the Democrats take control of the House and even the Senate, the entire federal government is going to seize up with investigations and possible impeachment and that kind of stuff. And that's going to affect the dollar negatively. Geopolitical risk, which is war in the Middle East, Iran, North Korea, Russia, NATO, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of the back burner here for the last couple of months, but that can flare up at any time. And then finally, de-dollarization risk is what I was talking about earlier. The idea that other nations are moving to set up at least an alternative to these dollar platforms, which is international settlement and the use of what's called the SWIFT system, which is the way banks kind of operate and transfer money around the planet. The U.S. wields that as a weapon. And if you look at what has taken place, even in just the last 90 days, the Trump administration has sought or imposed sanctions and tariffs against, and let's move from east to west, China, Pakistan, Iran, over to Turkey, and up to Russia. Well, those are 5 pretty important countries in what we call the One Belt, One Road initiative, the New Silk Road Project, the Eurasian Alliance, whatever you want to call it. And it's as though the U.S. is taking preemptive strategies to try to blunt anything they might do as an alternative to the dollar. This is coming regardless, and I guess this feeds pretty well into anybody who is preparing for an uncertain future should be aware of this stuff.
Specifically on the de-dollarization point, in addition to those countries that you mentioned, tariffs being levied against, what weight do you put towards either cryptocurrencies' role going forward against the dollar, specifically China and other gold-backed commerce directly in either gold or in non-U.S. currency between China and other nations, and then thirdly, state-issued currency. We've had a couple of guests just recently talking about the possibility for state-issued. There's California, and there's New York, and there's a bunch of other states that are talking about bringing out their own, basically providing an alternative to the Treasury notes as an alternative currency. So, are any of those others significant players in this de-dollarization that you're looking at?
I might take that and go backwards. Dan, again, I don't know much about this idea of state-issued currency. I'm not sure the federal government and the Federal Reserve System would allow them to get away with it without a fight. So that might be something that comes after the dust settles at some chaotic point in the future. So I don't know much about whether that's a valid point, at least in terms of what I'm looking at. The cryptocurrencies, I think, are tremendous. I've consistently stated for a couple of years now, I think they're a very good alternative or a complement to sound money like gold and silver, especially for a younger generation that's comfortable with it. And the real value to some of us older, sound money people is it's alerting a whole new generation of people that money, currency, does not have to be some central bank issued piece of script. It can be anything that's accepted as currency, right? And Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, the rest certainly are beginning to function that way. And I've got a guy on my site who added a wonderful comment within the community about family and friends that he has in Venezuela, and made note that it really wasn't even so much gold because so many people in Venezuela don't have any money, don't have any assets. But what has served to protect some folks in Venezuela has been Ethereum and other cryptocurrency, that they've been able to maintain purchasing power of everyday items, rather than, a couple million bolivars for a roll of toilet paper, they're able to still get toilet paper for a fraction of a crypto. And so it has a very viable role, no doubt about it, in where we're headed. But back to the other point, I do think, though, especially at the central bank, the sovereign nation level, the individual level, gold and silver are still your best protection against what is coming. The world has valued precious metal as a store of money and a store of wealth for literally millennia, going back to the time before Christ. It moves away from that, as politicians and others desire more and more from a system, and they do away with sound money over time. Again, you've seen the history is replete with examples of paper currencies that have failed because eventually you just have to print it to infinity to kind of keep the wheel spinning. Then what happens after that is the world then reverts back, learns the lessons of history, and then reattaches their monetary system to something more stable and sound like gold and or silver. And so that's where I think ultimately this is headed. Again, the important thing for people to research and learn about is the transient nature of this reserve currency status and what it means to a country that has it, what it affords them, the privileges that it affords them. And the U.S. has had this status now for 75 years-ish, since the end of World War II.
Yep.
But it hasn't always been that way, and it won't be that way forever. And so what people need to consider is, what will the world look like when the dollar maybe doesn't just go away, but that it has challenges, that there are other nations and other currencies that offer an alternative, and it establishes a diminished role for the dollar. What will that look like? What will that look like here in Kansas, where I live?
Right.
So what will that mean to my neighbors?
What do you foresee as some maybe 1, 2, or 3 specific attributes of a post global reserve currency status America?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'm kind of talking in circles here. It's not just first and foremost. Let me give you 2 prongs of the same argument. One, it's a reduced amount of government services. Those that rely upon some type of social welfare program are probably going to see that, pushed aside due to some type of austerity measures for the government. You just can't keep growing spending at this, infinitely growing level if you don't have a way to support it. And so really there's no other choice but to somehow have a reconfiguring. And I'm not just talking like welfare checks. I'm talking about Social Security checks, talking pensions at the state and local level, corporate level even. And so people need to understand that will have long-term ramifications for those type programs. But at the real basic level, having this reserve currency status and having what was, I guess, dreamed up, if you will, when Nixon closed the gold window in the early 70s, Henry Kissinger convinced the Saudis to price energy, price crude oil, price really then all commodities in dollars, thus creating an artificial demand for dollars. And when you have a natural resource and you sell that resource like crude oil for dollars, well, you sell your crude oil, in exchange you get dollars. Well, now what the heck are you going to do with those? You buy our treasury bonds and you recycle those dollars, in a sense quarantining them so they're not out in the public like the Venezuelan currency or the Turkish lira or the Iranian rial, causing massive inflation. All these dollars that have been created while we've gone $21 trillion in debt have been quarantined in our bond market. Well, if you lose that reserve currency status, if you lose the pricing of commodities in dollars, then that demand for dollars drops while the supply of dollars is increasing. Econ 101 shows you that means your value falls. As that happens, inflation becomes rampant, even at the local level. And so everybody, your neighbor across the back fence, the guy that, his kids play soccer with yours, that kind of stuff, everybody's going to feel that. And if you're already stretched thin trying to make ends meet with a couple of different part-time jobs, trying to afford health care and property taxes and caring for your parents and all this kind of stuff, inflation at 10 or 20% a year is going to be the straw that breaks the camel back and could eventually lead to some of that societal discord that you kind of referenced earlier, Dunnigan.
We've had people in the past talking about some of the key things that inflation will affect right away is purchasing power from workers who have an active income. The value of their wages is less in purchasing power. Savers, people who have a cash savings or cash equivalent savings, purchasing power gets eroded quickly. And anybody who's got pensions, as you mentioned. So again, a defensive posture against that could be precious metals or cryptos.
Right.
Or real assets.
Real assets. Buy stuff now that you might need in the future. Exactly. That's another way to look at it. And so just to be clear, I mean, this is something that will impact everybody. And the notion that, the last time we kind of went into this type of situation was in the 1970s after Nixon closed the gold window, completely detached the dollar from any anchorage, and we just started printing money like crazy for the Vietnam War and then, everything else that went with it, Reagan's defense budget, whatever you want to call it. And then all the social programs and everything else. And the deficits began to explode. And what halted it then was Paul Volcker, this is in large part, running interest rates up to 15, 18, even 20%. Can't do that today. And that was a one-time deal back in 1980 and 1981. Can't do that today because already the federal government's going to spend about almost $500 billion this year alone in interest on the accumulated debt. And that's at an interest rate of maybe 3%. Okay, we're going to run it to 15% again, huh? Now we're talking $2.5 trillion a year just to service the existing debt. That just doesn't work, man. That mathematically doesn't work because then you just have to print even more money to service. Anyway, I think everybody gets the point. So there really is, once this does happen, no way out. It's a function, though, of whether some of these countries that would offer an alternative, under what situation would they do it? Because I wouldn't expect the U.S. to just, peacefully hand over this status, and go quietly into the night and say, okay, China, Russia, whomever, it's your turn. So there will probably be some conflict that goes with it. And folks will be able to see it coming. It's not, it won't just happen quietly, one day. And so anyway, the time to prepare is now. That obviously fits into what you talk about here on your site, Dunnigan, and what I talk about on mine.
When you talked about in rising interest rates environment, it was a one-time deal. What was structurally different other than the sheer volume of the debt back in 1980 that made that possible for Paul Volcker to do that's not possible today?
Well, that's the most important part right there. Just that dollar value of the, how much it takes to service this existing debt. I mean, everybody's seen a parabolic chart at some point, kind of looks like a rhino horn. That's what happens when you have a debt-based system like we currently do. Again, the federal government is running $1 trillion deficits now as far as the eye can see. Even the Trump administration, which many had thought, getting back to that generally accepted narrative, would somehow be fiscally responsible and that the Republicans were going to be fiscally responsible when it's not even remotely the case. Every budget projection now through the end for the next 10 years shows a U.S. deficit of at least $1 trillion, if not $1.5 trillion, and that assumes pretty significant economic growth to provide the tax revenue to keep the deficit limited to that amount. It's that line item of interest that if interest rates double, then the line item doubles, and now that deficit grows even faster, and then the interest grows even faster, and so it just mathematically it doesn't work. Dunnigan, that's the plain basic answer as to why they can't do it again.
When you talked about runaway government spending that's possible as long as you're the only one, you're the only game in town issuing, however much currency you want. I've heard one quote recently about $26 trillion for Pence's new Space Force program, the new division of the armed services. But I don't know over what period of time that was, a 10-year estimate or what that was. But when you talked about our projected deficits of $1 trillion a year going forward, I'm not sure that was before or after the announcement of the Space Force program.
Right. Yeah. Well, and at the end, it kind of speaks to confidence, because that's really, as if with anything, whether it's equities or bonds or the dollar, a lot of times it's about confidence. If you feel confident that a stock is going up, other people probably feel the same way, and it kind of feeds on itself, and up it goes. When there's finally a loss in confidence, when there's loss of confidence in the bond market, that kind of thing, that's when this is going to happen. Because some folks say, alleged Nobel laureates like Paul Krugman say, this isn't a problem at all. We would just have the Fed just keep, if it takes $3 trillion a year, we'll just have the Fed print $3 trillion a year. Again, as if that's perfectly fine. I don't know. I'm afraid that at some point between now and $3 trillion a year of Fed printing, there becomes an utter loss of confidence in the future and where this is going, and the ability to service debt. Then all of a sudden people start selling their bonds. They don't want to buy any bonds anymore. And if they don't need to buy any bonds anymore because they're not collecting dollars anymore in international trade, well, again, you can see where this could rapidly spin out of control. Now, look, I'm not going to try to fool anybody. I've been talking about this stuff for 7 or 8 years now. And I didn't think they could piece it together much past 2012. And here we are in 2018, right? Okay, fine. But it's still a mathematical certainty. We just haven't reached that breaking point yet. And so we just continue to do what I do. People on my site continue to do what they do. We're all in the same boat together. And we're all trying to help each other prepare for this stuff. And it just is still most assuredly coming. It just, trying to nail down a date is something that you really can't do.
And as you pointed out earlier, there are real world impacts on real people now during these. You mentioned even
Right.
since 2011 to now. Look at the last 7 years. As far as look at the number of these U.S. dollars that it takes to purchase a college education or food for the family for a month,
Right.
or your medical insurance and premiums and copays and everything for a year,
Right.
and on
Right.
and on.
Just to kind of let people, if they don't understand how this works, the government does this. They're involved. They're running the deal. It's like the consumer price index, right? Back in 1992, I think it was, Alan Greenspan came up with a whole new formula for how Social Security cost of index, and now the consumer price index has been massively understated in the time since. They use, anybody can Google the term hedonic adjustments, HEDONIC, and see what that means. It's not connected to hedonism that might happen at Club Med or something like that. It's the way that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, you want to talk about voodoo math. They'll say that, you used to be able to get a cell phone for $50. Now you can't get an iPhone for $300, right? But they say that the $300 phone is cheaper than the $50 one, and thus prices haven't risen because your $300 phone can do so much more, like allow you to get on Snapchat.
Right.
That's how they've justified all these different ways of showing inflation at 2%. And again, besides controlling expenditures like cost of living adjustments for Social Security recipients, it also allows them to control the bond market and the rate of interest that they pay bondholders. Because if inflation were truly stated to be 10%, nobody in their right mind would buy a 10-year note at 3%. Because on an inflation-adjusted basis, you're losing 7% a year. You would demand 12. You would demand 15, and as we just addressed, 15% interest on the accumulated debt blows the whole thing up. And so they are massively understating inflation already, though, as you astutely mentioned, Dunnigan, you, me, the guy whose house I'm staring at out of my office window here, everybody is feeling what we all know to be true. And trying to, heck, Dunnigan, here's another government stat for you. The amount of Americans working multiple part-time jobs is the highest it's been since 1999. Mm-hmm. And government tells you it's wonderful. Oh, it's bliss. Trump tweets about how great it is and how roaring the economy is because they have an interest in keeping that going, keeping the stock market afloat so that everybody that has money feels wealthy because, oh, my 401k went up this month. But at the end of the day, you look at those employment numbers and you look under the hood and you see that it's more people working part-time jobs is the only sector that's growing, and then more people working part-time jobs than ever, and that more people working multiple part-time jobs more than in the last 20 years. And that's because what happened is your $60,000 job got you laid off, and so now you're working 3 separate part-time jobs trying to make ends meet. Again, this is not sustainable. And that, again, I'm not saying that by Halloween all hell's going to break loose, but this is the type of stuff people need to be paying attention to and preparing for.
Craig, I know that our time is short tonight, and I appreciate this check-in. You've given us a lot of food for thought. We'd love to have you back on again soon to follow up a little bit more detail on some of these themes. But thank you very much tonight for introducing us to these major themes of 2018. It gives people a lot to think about and make some serious choices. I think it should drive some serious conversations within households of where are we putting all our eggs, and had we better make sure that we're taking care of our families regardless of which way this thing goes. So
and in advent, when that inflation, let's look at it here. Let's put it down to real today's news. Most people know what's going on in Venezuela. and the currency is crashing, and they're printing, toilet paper is more valuable than, 1,000 Bolivar note or whatever the hell it is. If you had the presence of mind in Venezuela 2 years ago to stockpile some toilet paper, to stockpile some food, to stockpile whatever, at whatever the current exchange rate back then was of Bolivar to toilet paper, you'd be at least managing through what's happening there now. And I'm not saying what's going on in Venezuela is coming to the U.S., but something at least somewhat similar is very likely at some point in the next. And prepare basic necessities now. And if this is some dope on a YouTube channel that you interviewed said that this was going to happen, and I end up being wrong, I don't think you're really worse for the wear.
You still have plenty of toilet paper.
Yeah, exactly. So please, I just beg everybody, educate yourself on the risks that are out there, because they're very real, and take steps to prepare now. Watching your channel, listening to your guest, Dunnigan, is one of the smartest things people can do. So I encourage people to keep doing that, and just be alert, be situationally aware of what the risks are out there to you and your family.
And when people want to find out more of your research, where should they go?
The site is TF Metals Report, and the best thing about it is it's an online community of people. I mean, we come from all over the world, different political philosophies, religions, whatever. But we all recognize that at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat, right? And we're all trying to help each other through it. It's a great community. I encourage people to check it out. So thank you for having me plug it a little bit.
We've been speaking with Craig Hemke, the founder of TF Metals Report. Today is Monday, August 27, 2018. Craig, thank you for joining us again on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure, my friend. Let's do it again soon.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.